By the time 1974 rolled around, the Plymouth Valiant had already been in production for over a decade. The car that started as a homely-looking, strange, odd Virgil Exner-style creation in 1960. By the way, when it was launched, it was not the Plymouth Valiant, it was just the Valiant, had evolved into a much more conventional vehicle, perhaps owing to Elwood Engel taking the helm of Chrysler styling in 1962. The Valiant was initiated in 1960 and would conclude in the 1976 model year. But before it gave its last gasp of air, the Valiant lineup would get a new injection and a new model, and one that's, I would say, the most oxymoronic vehicle name that is perhaps ever made, and that is the Valiant Brougham. The Valiant Brougham, you say? How in the world can a Valiant be a luxury car, or at least a near luxury car? Well, that's what Chrysler tried to do to the Valiant near the end of the run. It was not, let's say, just happenstance that caused the Valiant Brougham to be created in 1974. This was the year after the OPEC oil embargo that had taken place in 1973. And so consumers were looking for smaller cars to not just be economical in some cases and be cheap, but also that they could save on gas with the vehicle and also have a little bit of luxury. So that was perhaps what precipitated the Valiant Brougham and its introduction in 1974. And before continuing to discuss the 1974 Valiant Brougham, I have to point out, by this point, the Valiant was really a strong-selling vehicle, selling almost 300,000 units at this point in time. And maybe some of its popularity was due to the fact that the 1971 film, Duel, employed Dennis Weaver driving an orange Valiant that you see here being chased by a semi-truck with a driver that you never saw. If you haven't seen the movie Duel, it's pretty cool and an early Steven Spielberg film. In any case, 1974 was the year in which all Valiants would ride atop a 111-inch wheelbase and become common with the Dodge Dart. In the prior generation, there were two wheelbases, the 108-inch wheelbase, and then beginning in 1971, there was a 111-inch wheelbase for the Plymouth Valiant Scamp, which was a little two-door car that was based on the Dodge Dart Swinger, and it just had a Valiant front end to kind of make it look a little bit different from that Dart. So there have been two wheelbases ever since 1971 through the 1973 model year on the previous generation. Now everything was common, and the Valiant was basically just a Dodge Dart in many ways. In fact, if you look at the inset at the top right, you'll notice that the surfacing on the body side is identical between the Dart and the Valiant. By this point, the Dart and the Valiant shared the fenders, the doors, the roof panel, the glass, the door uppers, the windshield, the backlight, even the hood. I think the only thing that was really different on the front end between the two was the grille and then the header panel that was in front of the hood. The Dart having a bit more of a pointy beak versus the Valiant, and like I said, a little bit different grille, but that's basically it. The cars were basically badge-engineered variants of one another by this point. So it really just made a difference in terms of whose dealership showroom you walked into, the Plymouth or the Dodge dealer, in terms of which one that you were going to buy. There really wasn't compelling difference in the styling on the four-door models that you see here. Even as we transition to the rear three-quarter view of this particular Plymouth Valiant Brougham, the only real difference is the panel in between the taillights that says Plymouth here on the Valiant, and then the Dodge, it says Dodge. The taillight area and the form was still the same. So Chrysler, probably by this point, just didn't have that much money and was looking to get some minimal differentiation between the two models, but didn't have money to do a heck of a lot more. I guess they did change the taillights slightly between the Valiant and the Dart. The Dart and the Valiant had the reverse lights in a different location, but really that's it. The cutout and the space for the taillights was the same. Regardless, when you got the Valiant or the Dart, what did you get? You got a vehicle with very flat quarters, very flat fenders. Take a look at this belt line here. I mean, my goodness, almost perfectly flat. And this was what Elwood Engel liked, and that was what Ford styling liked for many years. including on later vehicles like the Panther platform cars. I don't know why, but during this time frame and even a little bit before, I would say, there was this trend toward lower end cars having this concave backlight, and that was pretty expensive. The Chevrolets, like the Impala and Caprice Coupe, had that from the late 60s and early 70s, and I don't know why that became a styling trait on some of the lower end cars, but it did, and here it is on the Valiant. You also got a super tall greenhouse with a lot of headroom. Chryslers during this time frame were often bought by older clientele who sometimes wanted to be able to wear a hat, and so you often saw the roof lines of Chryslers and the overall height as being higher than competitive makes, and that was one of the reasons for it. But aside from those styling traits that I mentioned, there's really not much to write home about on the Valiant. You do have kind of this frame of a surface that's formed by a crease on the upper edge that starts at the fender, goes all the way rearward, and then you have a similar crease on the lower edge, and it just kind of gets wider as it goes rearward on the car. You got this little kick up on the rear door, and really that's about it from a surfacing standpoint. Very straightforward car, not necessarily the greatest looking, not my favorite, but like I said, a lot of people bought it. I think it was just an inoffensive little car, and for that reason, it appealed to a lot of people. And as we'll talk about, it came with very reliable engines and transmissions that perhaps helped boost overall its popularity, given the reputation for ruggedness. Now, as we transition to the interior, this is what the Valiant Brougham was all about. Yes, that is factory fabric there on the seats. You got this velour-style cloth on the seats, then the vinyl inserts that kind of flank them and in the middle, and really bucket-style seats. A nicely padded safety-style steering wheel with the horn ring that's incorporated into the three spokes, and the fake wood on the dash. Of course, you have to have the square-style speedometer. Chrysler loved these square-style speedometers for a number of years. I'm not sure why. Everything else is round. You got round gauges and switches for most everything else except the HVAC unit there in the middle and the radio. But Chrysler, and particularly Plymouth, loved the square speedometer. I guess it was a brand character trait. Notice also the richly padded door panels. You can see the assist strap up top there that is kind of pushed into the padding. And the padding was quite thick up top. So that was another thing that you got in the Valiant Brougham, along with incremental sound deadening and insulation. Overall, the dash was a very simple affair, and you notice those vents underneath the dash there. And no, that's not an aftermarket air conditioner. That was how the air conditioner was integrated on these Valiants. This is a factory AC car, and it's basically like a bolt-on, dealer-installed air conditioning setup. There weren't vents in the upper portion of the dash just to get fresh air. Otherwise, you just had the typical kickwell vents. That was something that was an interesting choice for Chrysler, particularly on the Valiant Broughams, that they never ducted anything up into the dash, and perhaps it was just going to cost too much. And you can imagine, where would you put those? There's not really a space on this dash for that. And I suspect that Chrysler engineers just felt that it was cheaper and easier to have those vents down there and for that to be the way that the air conditioning was integrated. But aside from that, you did get nice high back seats that you can see in this particular photo. And you also notice that the lower portion of the door panel is carpeted. The carpet in this was actually pretty rich as well. And the instrument panel top pad was richly padded. So most things that you did touch had good padding on them or had a unique style of material that was unique to the Valiant Brougham. And so this one being green, I think, also is quite tasteful. The back seat area, there's even quite a bit of room in the back seat for something that was a relatively small car. And again, you could buy this car, you could have a little bit of luxury, didn't have all the trappings of luxury, but you had power steering, power brakes, a good engine under hood, and comfortable seating and optional air conditioning like you see in this car. So there were quite a few things that you could get to make it a little bit of a luxury vehicle beyond just an economy car. Now, under hood in your Valiant, you had the choice of a standard 198 cubic inch slant six-cylinder engine, a 225 cubic inch slant six-cylinder engine, or Chrysler's 318 V8. If you got a Duster, you could get the 360 optional, but in the Valiant sedans like this, the 318 was the top engine option. And while the 318 was no powerhouse, it certainly was super durable. These 318s are rugged. They're one of the best V8 engines ever made. They will last hundreds of thousands of miles with minimal service. Same for the Slant 6. Slant 6s will last 300,000 plus miles with minimal service. All you'll hear is the adjustable valves ticking away. They still had adjustable valves, I think, until the 1981 model year when they finally got hydraulic valve lifters. But the engines in here and the torque flight transmissions were absolutely reliable and bulletproof. And as you can see, you get in this one Chrysler's big V-twin air temp air conditioning compressor to cool the cabin and to help have cool air blow out of those three vents that were beneath the dash. That is something that is just a masterpiece of engineering. I don't think the air temp setup was quite as good as General Motors and the A6 compressor, but it was better than Ford's by far, and it was a really great system. This picture is also great because if you look on the driver's side fender, you can see the electronic ignition box that's mounted there, and then just behind it on the firewall is the infamous ballast resistor. Now, Chrysler on these cars had electronic ignition and was trying to improve overall reliability. The unfortunate thing about the 318 during this time frame is a couple things. One, Chrysler did not use great quality spark plugs from the factory in any of their engines. And the first thing I promptly do when I buy one of my Chrysler product cars is I put AC Delco regular spark plugs in it, and it runs way better, especially those cars they have with low mileage on them that came from the factory with Champion or Prestolite plugs. They're terrible. They're junk. Throw them out, or maybe if you want, save them for originality. But the car will run infinitely better and have instant starts if you put AC Delco plugs in there and if you rebuild the carburetor. My 72 New Yorker, my 72 Imperial fire up instantly in any weather. The other thing is I always keep a spare ballast resistor in the glove box because that, particularly on wet days, likes to fail. Do not wash your car and then pop the hood and have water run down on it, especially while the car's been running before that and it's hot. You will likely kill the ballast resistor, and you can tell the symptom for that is that you'll crank the car and it will fire up, but then it'll almost instantly shut off. And if you have that, that's the symptom for the ballast resistor. It's not that it won't start. It starts and then instantly turns off. So just sharing a little bit of Chrysler knowledge for all of you to make your 318 more reliable. Again, the engines themselves are super rugged, super durable. There's just some of the components around them that really weren't as great as they were on other cars. Like the GM HEI ignition setup, I would say was the industry standard. This setup from Chrysler was, I think that's probably the best adjective to describe it. So what do you think of this Valiant Brougham? Put a comment in the comment section. Let me know. Thanks again for watching.